The gavel hovered above the crystal dais like a threat. 47 species watched from tiered balconies, their eyes, lenses, and photoreceptors fixed on the human standing alone at the well. Menon looked small under the vault of the Supreme Physical Tribunal, just a soft-voiced engineer in a rumpled jacket, a teacher's lanyard still around his neck. Behind him, the bailiffs had already sealed the human shipyards under emergency decree. One more strike of the gavel, and humanity would be barred from building anything bigger than a lifeboat. Last statement, intoned Archmagistrate Karith. His carapace shone like a black star. Tradition, not mercy. Men glanced at the microphones, at the jug of water, at a discarded loop of Lixian fiber optic vine that someone had used for decorations. 9 minutes, he said. Give me 9 minutes and your table, and I'll show you why your law is aimed at a shadow. A rustle of offense, curiosity, hunger. Karitha's mandibles clicked. You cannot change physics in 9 minutes. I don't need to, Min said. I only need to change your mind about what you think physics forbids. He appended the water into the glass carafe, slid a mic stand through the handle, clipped a quart microphone to the rim, and wrapped the Lixian fiber around the base. He asked the LYX envoy for a pulse. LYX obliged, their body shimmering light flowed down the fiber like a breath. The microphones hummed, the carafe rang. The chamber scoffed. Then the note swelled clean, startling, impossible to ignore. Someone checked the power meters. Someone else frowned. The signal had not grown stronger. The noise had grown quieter. Min smiled without triumph. Resonance doesn't create energy, he said, eyes on Karith. It shepherds it. We've been treating leaks as law instead of loss. He tapped the rim and the note sharpened, the waveform on the central hollow thinning to a blade. 9 minutes, he repeated softly. Watch. He kept the rhythm gentle, tap, adjust, breathe. The carafe's pitch drifted, settled, held. LYX's biofiber pulsed on the downbeat, their internal photosits sinking to Min's tapping like a choir taking the key. The quartz hollow displays were built for spectacle and corruption checks, not impromptu lectures, but data is a traitor to politics. Numbers assembled in neat columns all the same. This is not a machine, Min said. It's a conversation. A leaky one. He dragged the mic stand an inch, the tone shimmered. Every system we build loses something at the edges, heat, phase noise, jitter, mismatch. We call those limits. They're costs. Costs can be mitigated. Karith folded 2 of his forearms. You propose to justify unlawful engines with metaphors and parlor tricks. Min nodded toward the judicial energy audit in the corner of the display. Baseline power, fixed. Detectors, calibrated. Spectral density of the courtroom's acoustic field, dropping in broad bands, rising in a narrow band where the carafe sang. Not adding. Reallocating. Like stopping a leak in your roof by guiding drips to a bucket. You don't own more water. You own less mess. The gallery shifted uneasily. War clans understood buckets. Scholars resented them. LYX leaned nearer, a lattice of living strands and glows. You are using my pulse as the clock, they said, voice a bright chord broadcasting into a dozen auditory ranges at once. To phase lock the hum to the room. And the room to the hum, Min said. Bidirectional constraint. We do this with plasma. With shields. With drives. Not to cheat conservation. To keep the energy we already bought from running into gutters. Karith gestured, and a cluster of expert systems descended in a cold halo of procedural contempt. Your doctrine risks failure cascades. The galaxy has suffered enough from your improvisations. Min's jaw flexed. He didn't argue. He touched the fiber coil, picked a point that sounded wrong, and nudged it until it wanted to be right. I teach teenagers, he said, as if stating a credential. If I can't explain an engine with junk and a song, I don't understand it. The displays steadied. The courtroom swallowed its own noise. Above the dais, a live model of energy flows in the chamber redrew itself, bright channels braided through the LYX fiber, pooled along the mic stand's steel, circled the caraffe's neck. The total stayed honest. The losses got shepherded. Karith raised the gavel. Enough. The doors burst open. A bailiff stumbled, armor scorching with micrometeor pox. Emergency transmission Van Die Trang training vessel Adagio. Disabled in a whitewash stream. 8 souls aboard. Juveniles. The ceiling lights dimmed as every comm organ in the hall reached for the same signal. Whitewash streams were where instruments went to die, fields that shook charge carriers until they forgot their names. You survived them by not being there. Caritha's voice flattened. All jumps to that sector require tribunal approval. We adjourn to protocol. The human yards remain sealed. Min looked up at the vault that had just swallowed his 9 minutes. He didn't plead. He set the carafe down gently, as if to avoid startling the universe. Then I'll build a ship here, he said. The dais was sacred. He climbed it anyway. Bailiff spared shock rods. LYX slid between them, singing a frequency that made metal polite. He requires my pulse, they said, shimmering, and your dais. Karith snapped, stand down, which the bailiffs heard as hesitate, and that was enough. Min hauled the microphone truss off its anchor, rotated the crystal dais a quarter turn, and exposed the tribunal's underfloor, hex tiles riddled with conduits, a hair-fine grid of transport coils for prisoner transfer and ceremonial phasing. He'd studied the architecture the way a desperate teacher studies a faulty school boiler, not to exploit, but because bored minds draw blueprints from memory when they can't sleep. Your platform is a matter diffuser, he said, hands already moving. You built it for solemn theatrics. I can repurpose it for a field-safe assembly line. Caritha's laughter was all mandible. You cannot conjure a rescue craft out of court furniture. Not furniture, Min said. Standards. He popped tile after tile with a bailiff's truncheon, exposing coil clusters, sorting them by resonance like a street musician tuning glasses. Every culture here insists on interoperable ceremonial tech. You did that so ambassadors wouldn't teleport into floors. Interop cuts both ways. LYX lay down flat, spreading their filaments across the coils like a translucent sea, their internal light strobing with deliberate grace. My pulse, they said, is yours. The first pieces rose out of the floor on a tide of controlled diffraction, hex segments blooming from the dais like petals programmed matter, pre-authorized patterns for reconfiguration of symbology. Min didn't need a warship. He needed a tool, hull, anchor, field cage, no ornament. He cut the altar into usable verbs. Students, he called. 10 teenagers, 5 human, 5 not stood from the public gallery with the guilty reflex of those who had promised they were only here to watch. Their faces were different, their hunger was not. You trained on sandbox rigs. This is the same thing with sharper teeth. Station 1, extract coils. Station 2, phase map. Station 3, lattice stitch. We build a spine, then a cage, then a sheath. We do not chase clever. We chase safe. Caritha's voice cracked the room's air again. You will not weaponize my court. Men didn't look up. No weapons, he said. A stretcher. Pieces clicked. The dais spilled standard safety interlocks, authenticated connectors, coils wound to the exact jurisprudential frequency that made the tribunal feel holy. Men honored the holiness by keeping all his hacks reversible. He would put their altar back together or let them put him in prison. Ethics first, victory second. The teen named Hild, a Valian with hands like patient cranes, raised a diagnostic. We can stabilize the spine if we borrow the gallery rail, same alloy as the coil cages. Borrow it, men said. Apologize later. He caught Caritha's stare. Not to you, he added quietly. To the rail. Lyx's laugh sounded like rain through fiber. The stretcher took shape, a rigid spine threaded with tribunal coils, a cage of braided Lyx light that could carry a pocket of quiet through a screaming field, a skin woven from floor banners and mic cables that could shed charge like a bird sheds rain. It looked wrong. It looked inevitable. Hild asked, who flies? Men strapped the stretcher to his chest. Nobody flies, he said. We fall the right way and catch the right place. Carith stepped down from the dais at last. He stood an arm's length away. Do you understand that if you die, your law dies with you? Men tightened the last buckle. If I don't try, my law was dead already. Lyx splayed their filaments into the stretcher's cage. The world went quiet at the edges. The teenagers checked each other's harnesses with sacred fussiness. Carith lifted his hand. The bailiffs lifted theirs. Open the floor, he said. The stream did not look like water. It looked like a truth that had lost interest in continuity. Space jittered. Starfields smeared into static and back. Instruments that used electrons looked like liars, instruments that used light looked brave until they remembered they were made of electrons. Somewhere inside that dim roar, 8 kids were holding their breath and counting backwards through the numbers their teachers had taught them for fear and focus. The stretcher slid into the field like a held note finding a harmony. Lyx's pulse became the clock everything else obeyed. Men had anchored the tribunal coils at a frequency the stream found boring. Boredom was salvation. The cage leaked in all the right directions. Anchors in, Hild said, voice thick over bone conduction. Spine is humming. Field cage is flirting but not committing. Tell it a joke, men said. They all murmured lame jokes, science puns, prayers, confessions. The cage steadied, either from humor or from the human habit of sounding alive when faced with a void. Adagio spun into view, a training craft with the personality of a stubborn bus. Its hull plating had blistered where the stream had told electrons to reconsider employment. Its students had done everything right: kill power, isolate circuits, broadcast dumb, breathe slow, and none of it mattered without a pocket of clean physics to get them out. Latch in 3, men said. 2. 1. Hild caught the adagio with a coil loop that loved it on exactly one side. The cage made room. The stretcher's spine moaned, then relaxed. Little hands waved at windows. One of the kids on the other ship held up a whiteboard that read, "Is this legal?" Another one shoved it aside and wrote, "Thank you." A shadow slid across the stream's edge. Caritha's face filled men's peripheral, calm, pale, severe, unreadable. Live broadcast. Of course he'd made it a lesson. Under tribunal edict, Carith said, "You are operating without sanction." Men worked the stretcher anyway. Participatory civics, he said. Extra credit. The stream surged. Charge built on the cage like frost. LYX tightened their pulse until it became a needle. Men matched it with his breath, the way he had in the courtroom: tap, adjust, breathe. The stretcher found the river inside the river and let it carry them sideways. One of the teenagers, Asha, human, always too brave, whispered, "I'm scared," and didn't sound ashamed. "Me too," Men said. "Good. Fear pays attention. Courage does math." They slid. The tribunal coils hummed with holy boredom. The cage shed electrons like rain, like birdsong, like a pour of water catching perfect glass. The adagio trembled against them and then stopped trembling. The stream spit them out into clean dark. Stars snapped into focus. Instruments remembered their names. The kids in the adagio screamed relief, which is the most honest kind. Men let his head fall back against the stretcher. His lungs went from coins to bellows. LYX's filaments sagged, then relit with a lazy joy. That, Hild said, voice breaking, was illegal. That, Men said, was necessary. Back in the tribunal, the dais looked naked without its dignity. The altar tiles were stacked in tidy towers, the rails came back scuffed, the coils hummed with the contentment of tools that had done work. The teenagers clutched cups of electrolyte soup like relics. The rescued students were fine shaken, oxygen-rich, very much alive and very much ready to boast to their friends that they had been inside an outlaw rescue. Karith entered without escort. He stood where Men had stood before, alone, haunted by the geometry of the room. The gallery thrummed with the desire to be right. "You defied a lawful order," Karith said. His voice did not boom this time. It traveled carefully, like someone stepping on broken glass. "You dismantled a sacred device. You endangered juveniles without authority." Men did not reach for a defense. He gestured to the data hollows. "We logged everything," he said. "Phase maps. Leakage paths, energy audits. The stretcher used nothing forbidden. It used standards you mandated for safety and tradition. It left less mess." Karith looked at the teenagers. Hild gazed back with open, inconvenient respect. Asha, with her bandaged knuckles and stubborn grin, nodded once as if to an equal. The rescued kids sat in the front row, their hands folded and their mouths shut, which is a child's fiercest form of testimony. LYX stepped forward, their lights dimmed to a solemn low. "The human used my pulse with permission. He guided, not stole. He returned what he took. He did not weaponize your court. He repurposed your caution." Karith closed his eyes. When he opened them, the black star in his carapace had lost its glare. "When I was young," he said, and every ridge in the room listened, because rulers do not say that unless they are about to bleed, our academies punished failure with exile. "We learned slowly. Safely. We lost a century to correctness." He reached for the gavel, touched it, did not lift it. "I wrote this ban because I fear chaos. I fear your improvisation more than I fear the void. I do not apologize for that fear." Men nodded. "Keep the fear," he said, gentle. "But aim it. Fear belongs in the checklist, not in the veto." "You will accept constraints," Karith said, and it was not a question. Testing tiers. Sandboxed trials. Redundant ethics on the console next to the throttle. Men smiled, the kind that happens when a teacher sees a student do a harder problem than assigned. "Yes," he said. "We'll even write the documentation in your language first." Karith looked at the altar tiles, at the rails, at the coils that had hummed holy and then hummed useful. He lifted the gavel, and for a moment everyone in the chamber truly did not know. The emergency ban on human shipyards, he said, is suspended. Effective immediately. In its place, this court establishes a doctrine of safe failure, tiered experimentation, interspecies oversight, mandatory logging, and the right of immediate action in defense of life. He brought the gavel down. It sounded like a carafe-finding pitch. LYX lit the ceiling with a soft aurora. The teenagers cried and tried not to. The rescued kids finally let themselves breathe without counting. Karith stepped down from the dais and did the most radical thing anyone had done all day. He held out a hand. "Teach me the part about the mic stand," he said. Min took the hand and didn't let himself look triumphant. "First lesson," he said. Nothing is only what it was designed for. The doctrine of safe failure wasn't a speech, it became a blueprint by lunch. A dozen clerk intelligences and 3 very caffeinated grad monks mapped it into drafts while bailiffs reassembled the dais with the careful guilt of people fixing a beloved toy. Karith did not retreat to his chambers. He stayed on the floor with Min and LYX and the teenagers, asking questions that tasted like old pride being converted into curiosity. "Tier 1 trials," Min said, sketching. "Children's science. If something breaks, we get funny smells and bad data. Tier 2, lab scale, fails closed. Tier 3, field sim with cutaways and kill lines. Tier 4, lives on the line and all the grown-ups in the room. Nothing jumps tiers without signatures from 3 species who disagree about at least 2 things." "That last requirement is perverse," Karith said. "It's insurance," Min said. "Disagreement exposes blind spots. Harmony hides them." They turned the gallery into a classroom. The tribunal's grand acoustics were repurposed to carry chalk scratch and laughter. The teenagers argued over wording like jurists. Hild insisted the kill lines be physical as well as logical, because software thinks it's a god when it's only a book. LYX drafted a consent protocol that read like poetry: "No pulse shall be borrowed without the lender's song recorded and respected." Karith stalked the periphery like a storm rethinking its job. When a monk suggested the ban remain in place until models catch up, the archmagistrate surprised himself by saying, "Models catch up faster when they have something messy to chase." He said it as if the sentence had been waiting years behind his teeth. They spun up the first sandbox in the tribunal sub-basement. It used the same matter diffuser coils that had been an altar that morning, now wrapped in auditing ribbon and festooned with warning signs that glowed in colors every species read as "Don't be stupid." The sandbox could host a ship section under arbitrary insults, charge storms, micrometeor grid, thunderous boredom, and ended every insult with an automatic lullaby, power dump, field detune, emergency foam. Min refused to be the first to use it. "Students first," he said, and the gallery gasped until he added, "to design the test." Hild and Asha built a miniature of the stretcher cage with improvements that made Min grin until it hurt: modular joints with tactile feedback that a panicking hand couldn't misalign, a visible leak river that literally glowed where energy ran away. The kids broke their toy 27 times. Each failure produced a page of notes, a joke, a lesson none of them would forget. Officials came in waves. Some left with grudges. More left with copies. The story rippled outward on a bandwidth that only gossip can achieve. Every species saw in the doctrine what terrified and delighted them: constraint that did not smother, risk-taking that did not worship bravado, a chance to bold sacred caution to ferocious curiosity and call the hinge civilized. By dusk, the tribunal's feeds carried a schedule: open lab, midnight lecture, first interspecies certification exam for sandbox officers. Karith signed the exam criteria himself. He made the oral section hard. He made the ethics harder. Someone will abuse this, a counselor muttered, watching the sign-ups spike. Someone always abuses everything, Karith said, not unkind. Our task is to make the abuse unprofitable, the use irresistible, and the rescue inevitable. Men wrote that on the whiteboard. He labeled it, New Law. They had exactly 3 days to be smug before the universe knocked on the door. The alert arrived during the midnight lecture on failure modes that look like success. A visual astronomer from the outer plane staggered into the hall, hair static with panic. Grid 7, she panted. The lighthouse cluster went dark. Not a brownout clean loss. Like someone turned the stars off. The lighthouses were not stars. They were a chain of ancient beacons stitched through a barren sector to train jump drives on, a metronome in the void. Thousands of cargo routes synchronized on their pulse. Without them, traffic would scatter into risk and hunger. People died when food forgot schedules. Karith looked at Min. Min looked at the sandbox. Tier 3 field sim, he said. We try to break the failure here before it breaks us out there. They fed the sandbox the astronomers' last good frames, the echo patterns, the transmission gossip. LYX played the beacon chord on their ribs, a shimmering tone that made insects in the rafters settle as if remembering an old lullaby. The sandbox conjured a slice of the cluster in the sub-basement, a crooked model of silence. Hild took the role of the cluster's central governor. Asha played the saboteur with theatrical relish. Min stood at the kill line with a hand on the dump lever. Karith leaned in so close he could smell solder and human coffee. They discovered the failure an hour before dawn. It was not malice. It was worse, a well-intended firmware update pushed by an automated compliance system that had decided, with impressive certainty, that a legacy phase correction routine was inelegant. The update removed it. The routine hadn't done anything obvious for a century. Except it had, all the time, it had caught anomalous drag in the beacon lattice and tucked it into moments nobody noticed. Elegance kills, Karith said, voice heavy. I signed orders like this in my youth. Elegance also heals, LYX countered softly, indicating the cage assembled from the dais. The question is whether we keep the ugly little truths that make it work. They built a patch that wasn't pretty. It restored the ugly routine and welded a guardrail around the compliance daemon. You do not remove what you do not understand on systems that let ships travel and children eat. The patch wasn't a law yet. It was a suggestion that acted like one. Who goes? The astronomer asked. It's a dirty update. We'll need to inject it by sight and hand. Sandbox officers, Karith said immediately. Graduates of the first exam. Hild and Asha froze. The exam was scheduled for an hour from now. The class looked at them as if life had been waiting for just such a dramatic entrance cue. This is Tier 4, Min said, steady. Lives on the line. You only go if 3 species sign off and your gut doesn't object. LYX's lights rippled. We sign, they said. Karith lifted a pen. It was ceremonial and ridiculous and necessary. I sign. The astronomer signed, hands shaking. And I'll fly, she added, because sometimes we volunteer to repent for our sector's neglect. They took the stretcher Mark II, student improved and a small ship that could sprint but not swagger. The tribunal opened a hole in bureaucracy that felt like a door held by a huge, contrite hand. The sandbox played the cluster's silence like a score as the ship fell into the real thing. It wasn't epic. It was exact. That's harder. He'd read the beacon spin like a percussionist catching a click track in a crowd. Asha babysat the patch with the tenderness of a pirate guarding ill-gotten candy. The astronomer threaded them through the lattice until the dead beacons lay beneath them like sleeping whales. Lyx's pulse kept time. Men didn't fly. He did what teachers do, he watched for the place the lesson might collapse and put cushions there. The patch took on the third attempt because the second attempt taught humility and the first attempt taught the exact shape of the thing pride hides. The beacon cord returned, ragged, then round. The cluster sang. Cargo routes breathed again. Somewhere, ovens warmed. Back at the tribunal, the sandbox printed the after-action in red and gold. Karith personally added a line to the doctrine: elegance requires guardianship. Legacy features that carry unknown safety must be tagged sacred until replaced by tests, not taste. He looked at Min and said, "Put that on the ethics console by the throttle." The Formalities Hall had never hosted a crowd like that: dock workers next to priests, students next to admirals, a dozen species of skeptics holding gift baskets from a dozen species of grandmothers. The Treaty of Cooperative Sandboxes lay on a table grown from courtroom crystal, one sheet per language, all binding, none superior. There were still arguments about adjectives. There are always arguments about adjectives when people decide to cooperate. Karith asked to sign first. The gallery murmured like a fault line. He stood with his back to a century of his own rulings and signed the first page with a claw that had once cut injunctions against improvisation. The pen scratched. Lyx sang one pure note that made the scratching sound like a river smoothing a stone. Men did not sign next. He pushed the pen to the astronomer from the outer plane. "The person who brought the problem gets credit for the solution's birth certificate," he said. The astronomer cried and pretended a dust mote had assaulted her eye. Lyx signed by pressing their light into the paper, which accepted the pulse as if ink had always been a cousin to luminescence. The teenagers signed as witnesses, their names small and fierce as graffiti on history's door. The oath was short. Good oaths are. They don't try to cover all futures. They try to aim. We will test before we trust. We will log before we boast. We will accept constraints to buy courage. We will take the faster path only when it is safer. We will not let fear sit in the veto chair, but we will give it a clipboard and a whistle. Reporters tried to turn it into a myth. Karith refused myth. He told the cameras he had been wrong and that the galaxy should expect him to be wrong again, loudly, but in more interesting ways. The absolution he received for saying that felt less like applause and more like a sigh of relief from institutions tired of pretending they were omniscient. There were dissenters. A block of purists filed an injunction calling the doctrine a humanizing contagion. They accused the tribunal of surrendering to spectacle. Karith scheduled their hearing for the following week and required that it be held in the sandbox. "Argue inside the safety systems," he said. "It will season your rhetoric." Men took a new job without leaving his old one. He became the first chief pedagogue of the doctrine, a title he found absurd and which nevertheless made his inbox explode. He taught crash courses that began with a carafe and a microphone and ended with a checklist written in 3 languages plus a cartoon for anyone who learned best by laughing. And then, because the universe respects ceremony when ceremony respects work, a convoy from a famine rim reached port 2 days early. The beacons held. The patch held. The cooks cried. People ate. Treaties are theory until dinner arrives hot. The tribunal's dais went back to looking holy, but it kept a tiny scar at the edge where a mic stand had gouged the crystal. Men touched it sometimes, not to be sentimental but to remember that everything useful is changed by use. Karith came to the lab on quiet mornings and learned to hold a soldering iron like an argument you intend to improve rather than win. He failed publicly. He learned to let teenagers correct him with the gentle brutality of students who love the subject more than your feelings. He wore that humiliation like armor. It made him kind. The bailiffs started bringing coffee. LYX split themselves into a traveling choir, half staying at the tribunal to be the pulse of the sandbox, half touring the lighthouses to teach maintenance crews the trick of listening for boredom. Their songs made work feel like ritual and ritual feel like work. It, too, became a hinge. Men took Karith to a school. Not a grand academy, an ordinary place with noise and scuffs and the smell of clay. They watched a class of 8-year-olds build a bridge from popsicle sticks and then load it with coins until it sighed. One kid cried when it broke. Another cheered. The teacher made them both write down what the bridge had said when it failed. This, men whispered, is the entire doctrine in miniature. Risk with purpose. Failure with a pen. Safety with room to try again. Karitha's mandibles clicked softly. I exiled a student once, he said. He defied a laboratory protocol to save a lab mate's hand. It was messy. He did not log. He closed his eyes. He built engines in exile for a pirate fleet. They killed 37. He opened them. I wrote the ban because I thought I could outlaw that shame. I merely hid it behind other people's permits. You can't outlaw hunger either, men said. We can build kitchens. And make the sign-up sheet easy. News from the beacons settled into routine. That's the best kind of news. The sandbox network multiplied, one in a mining arc, one on a pilgrim moon, one on a shipyard that had once voted to eject humans into a bureaucratic hole. The doctrine traveled not as an edict but as a kit, coils, manuals, jokes, case studies, a laminated card that read, nothing is only what it was designed for, start there, end somewhere better. The purists held their hearing. They argued that the doctrine romanticized improvisation. Karith listened for 2 hours, then invited them to run a Tier 2 trial. They proposed an elegant simplification of a docking procedure. The sandbox broke it 3 different ways while the logs took notes and the safety foam made their shoes sticky. The purists didn't sign the treaty. They did accept a copy of the laminated card. Small wins count. On a late evening when the halls were mostly asleep, Karith found men in the empty gallery, tuning a carafe out of habit. I have written a new clause, the Archmagistrate said. It protects whistleblowers who abort experiments for reasons of gut and reason combined. It also fines anyone who uses impossible in a grant application without a test plan attached. Men laughed. That's petty. It is precise, Karith said, smiling with half his face. Precision is how we apologize to the future. They stood under the dome while LYX's light choir practiced in the far wing, a soft shimmer like wind through reeds. The scar on the dais gleamed. The tribunal smelled faintly of coffee and solder and the expensive soap bureaucracies buy to prove they are serious about hygiene. It smelled like work. What comes after rescue? Karith asked, not rhetorically. Maintenance, men said. And stories. We tell this one until a better one replaces it. We teach it to kids so they can argue with it sooner. LYX joined them, filaments draped like a shawl of brightness. And we dance, they said. Because bodies remember lessons that words alone forget. The 3 of them, the law, the teacher, the pulse, stood in a hall that had tried to be only holy and had become useful instead. Outside, ships threaded the beacons, lured by a cord ugly enough to be safe. Inside, A sandbox waited for the next problem to swagger in, wearing certainty like a crown. Men tapped the carafe. The note settled into the room and the room into the note. The gavel was a fist-sized moon on its stand, quiet and watchful. Nothing is only what it was designed for, Karith said, as if taste-testing a line he'd once resisted. Including me. They didn't bow. They got back to work. The age of not yet achieved had paperwork now, checklists, schedules, signatures, coffee pots, scars. It also had kids who knew that fear belongs in the checklist, that courage does math, and that when the stars go out, you do not wait for permission to light a candle if your hands know how. That is not a myth. That is maintenance. That is how civilizations stay warm.